Originally known as Maroochy, Yandina is one of the first towns to be settled by Europeans on the Sunshine Coast 150 years ago. Known today for its tourism attractions and as a world-class dining and event destination, Yandina has a rich heritage built on timber getting, cane farming and cattle. The township was formally established in 1870, 17 years after the first cattle leases were issued nearby for a vast tract of land known as Yandina Station, in operation today as a popular wedding venue.
Yandina Station was nearly 100,000 acres, and for people to comprehend that these days, that's really quite difficult. So I often tell people, look, you think about an area right up to near Noosa and then right down to the Maroochy River, and that would have encompassed places like Karoi, Yamundi, Yandina. It's a massive, massive territory.
Two brothers, born in England but living in Brisbane, were granted the first 3 cattle leases for the area in 1853 and headed north.
So here we have Daniel and Zachariah Skyring. They're the first European settlers on the Sunshine Coast, and of course they were the brothers that applied for the leases that were granted in 1853. When 3 or 4 cattle runs were grouped together, they came under the name of a station.
On the edge of Yandina Station was the location of the region's first post office. With the discovery of gold in Gympie in 1867 came an urgent need for transport and communications. Cobb and Co won the mail contract, and a route was established between Brisbane and Gympie with stops along the way. James Lowe and his wife Christina, along with another couple, William and Mary Grigor, saw an opportunity to provide tired and hungry travellers with provisions and amenities, as well as horse change stations. In the Glasshouse Mountains, William and Mary Grigor set up Bankfoot House, while James and Christina Lowe established a hotel and moved the Yandina post office along with its name to eventually create the township of Yandina. Audine Bly is a direct descendant of early settler James Lowe and has written several books on Yandina's history.
When the government put the road through here from Brisbane to Gympie, it was not much more than a bush track, but it was able to cross the river just down here. And Cobb and Co would have thundered down this hill, crossed the stream right here. It was called South Maroochy Crossing, up the other side, and then off to Gympie.
Now a park, this parcel of land off Old Gympie Road was once the region's first commercial centre. It sits beside the Maroochy River, which was a vital lifeline.
This was fresh water, and this is why the Lowes settled here and had their hotel. They always had fresh water in the river, and Cobb and Co coaches had plenty of fresh water as well. Just on the rise above flood level, you would have had James Lowe's Hotel, which he called Maroochy House. Beside it, you would have had the post office, which also had a general store in it. And you would have had stables for Cobb and Co. It was a very convenient stop.
Not everyone could afford to travel by Cobb and Co.
Now, it was £3 10 shillings to travel from Brisbane to Gympie, when wages were only 5 shillings.
The name Yandina is an indigenous word meaning to go on foot. Yan, go, Dina, on foot. In search of gold, miners also travelled long distances on foot on the roads created by following ancient pathways. Timber getting was also an important early industry in Yandina, helped by the town's location on the Maroochy River.
There were rainforests on the coast, and they were sought after. The cabinet woods were well sought after by the timber getters, the cedar, the beech and the pine. And of course the river was there to throw the logs in the river for rafting, taking them down the river and then sending them off to the market.
Timber getters were among the first selectors of land in Yandina when the town was proclaimed in 1870, making it the first gazetted town in the Sunshine Coast Council area.
The surveyor Fryer, in recommending Yandina, said that it had port facilities. There was a certain point where the small boats could come up to, and then goods could be punted further up the river.
That point is known as the rocks. Visible only at low tide, these rocks prevented early paddle steamers from heading any further upstream. A jetty was built on the bank nearby to allow for the distribution of goods to smaller craft, which could then be punted up the river. The site remains in operation today as a function centre. Not long after it was declared a town, Yandina became home to the first government building on the Sunshine Coast, when the Yandina Telegraph Office was opened. The region's proximity to the Maroochy River made it an ideal place for early industries to thrive. Others too saw opportunities for investment in the town.
Our streets were named after the person who bought the corner block. So we have Buckle Street, named after the Reverend Joseph Buckle. He was from the Primitive Methodist Church, and we're told that he wanted to establish a chapel there in Buckle Street, but that didn't happen. Then there's Fleming Street. Now, Robert Fleming was a very rich man. He owned the gasworks in Bundaberg, and he bought blocks in what is now Fleming Street. We have Scott Street, and Scott was the head of a I think, Post and Telegraph Department in Brisbane. He was a Brisbane investor. Stevens is more interesting because Peter Stevens was a selector down our Maroochy River, and he'd done quite well, so he bought a block of land in town. Now there was Lowe Street, and that's named after my grandfather.
John Lowe, son of prominent business people James and Christina Lowe, built his family home in 1894. For his wife Louisa and their 9 children, still standing today and is still in the family.
Yes, this house at 125 years of age is one of the oldest structures in the district.
1879 saw the first school established near Yandina on what is now the exit to the Bruce Highway. It was replaced by Yandina Provisional School.
It became too small, and I think it was getting a bit dilapidated, so the community got together and applied for a state school.
Its construction in 1889 was not without incident.
They got the grant or the go-ahead to build that, and they got halfway through building it and realised that they'd built it in the middle of the road, so they had to then start again, like remove it.
And the school was raised, extended and repositioned to help the comfort and concentration of the students.
They found that the western sun coming in on the one side was making it too hot, so they turned it round to face the more to the east.
By the time the first school was built, Cobb and Co had stopped running to Yandina, and in 1891 a railway line and station was established, moving the town centre to its current location.
The reason the station was built here is more or less the centre of town, and also beside a watercourse that was brackish in nature, that it could be utilised in the engine. The Yandina station was the first station to have an angle for turning the engine, to have them facing the right way around to go home, to go back to where they're originally stated from.
The town centre soon became firmly established around the railway station. By the turn of the century, local business people moved their trade, and in some cases entire buildings, to this new location, with one move in particular stopping for nothing and no one.
When the pub was being moved on rollers and sleds dragged by the bullock teams, there was a baby being born upstairs. And the beer was still being served downstairs, and I can imagine the building creaking and carrying on, the men shouting and yelling, and the lady yelling too, I expect. She had a baby boy.
And that was Mrs. Summer.
Yeah. So they were pioneers in those days, weren't they?
They sure were.
Yandina Hotel is the oldest hotel on the Sunshine Coast. The pub was moved here in 1891, opposite the railway station.
The railway was for more than a century the commercial centre of the town.
We had a wagon every day. There was Monday to Friday. There was a freight that come in, plus farmers that get 10, 12 bales of hay or bags of chaff. If they couldn't come and get it out of the wagon, it was unloaded into here for storage for the local area, for the grocery shop, general hardware and farmers' produce.
Around the same time as the railway was built, local farmers started turning their land over to growing sugarcane, with cane trains transporting crops for processing at the Moreton Sugar Mill in nearby Nambour. Scott Trevor started working on the family farm in Yandina in 1950 and grew cane on the fertile river flats for more than 50 years.
I think if any other crop could have been grown here, it would have, but cane is just like the grass, it survives.
But life as a cane farmer was not easy, with the threat of disease, restrictions on labour, and the price of crops regulated by the government.
It was pretty tough. The mill started in 1897, I believe. They went bankrupt at one stage in early 1900s, and then they started up again. But things were pretty tough. In those days, the cane wasn't burnt. It was cut what they call in the leaf. But later on, the authorities allowed the cane to be burnt to stop what they had a disease in the cane from rats, that wheals disease, and so the regulation brought in that farmers right throughout Queensland were able to burn the cane, and that got rid of the rat problem.
Even with the construction of the railway, the river continued to play an important role in farming life for the transportation of their crops.
Before there were any roads here, we had what they call a punt service, a boat on the side of a big barge with 8 full trucks of cane on, and they used to travel up and down the river to a siding on the riverbank, and some horses would pull those 8 trucks off, and then they'd run 8 more empties on, and then they'd go back to the farm down the river, because there was no bridges before 1920.
The river played a role in the lives of farmers' children too.
There used to be a boat service, so took the school boat, the Colsons run it. They used to take children to school right through to Maroochy to Dunstan Rock, and they used to go further than bring the kids back, not to Maroochy and bring them back to Dunstan Rock.
In fact, the river was a vital lifeline for farmers, and traffic on this watery road provided them with just about everything they needed.
When we came here in 1941, we got all our mail and groceries by mail boat. We had no roads in those days, no vehicles. We used to get our milk and bread and ice from the butcher shop at Yandina every day. We go from Yandina to Maroochy, the mail boat, and on the way home, if we wanted anything the next day, we'd put a flag out on the jetty and our orders in a little matchbox, and he'd drop them in at the butcher and the baker and the grocer.
Cane farming, running cattle and timber getting 6 days a week made for a hard life. And entertainment options centred around community activities, again, often on the river.
Most farmers around the 1900s, the 20s, just had a rowboat, a flat-bottom rowboat, and they'd row up and down the river to visit the neighbours and that for a Sunday afternoon tea,
Along with picnics and fishing, heading to the racetrack was a popular pastime for many in the town. And in 1916, a School of Arts was built, a building that served many roles.
When the hall was built in 1916, that would have taken place of the dances would have taken place there, and movies, and we didn't call them movies in those days, we called them pictures. You'd go to the pictures at the hall, and silent movies. I think, Pat, you mentioned the silent movies, didn't you?
Yeah.
And what was the other bit of secret from downstairs?
Downstairs was a 2-up room, and I used to go and do a bit of gambling.
Did you?
Not me. Yeah.
It's still in good use today, isn't it? That hall, you
That
know,
hall is,
it's very
yes.
central and it's very attractive hall in my opinion.
So it was used for a lot of wedding receptions. I even had a wedding reception in there.
You had your wedding reception there.
In 1996, the Bruce Highway bypass was constructed, requiring land acquisitions and the relocation of some existing homes, like Yandina Historic House. Once the homestead of a cane farm, it was moved to its current location, where it serves as a visitor information centre. Despite inevitable change, you don't have to look very far to catch a glimpse of Yandina's past. Reminders of the early settlers can be seen throughout the town and even in the suburbs surrounding Yandina.
They named the new bridge the James Low Bridge, and beside it is Christina Low Park. So James and Christina are together.
As the township marks 150 years of settlement, the future of Yandina lays in preserving and celebrating its rich history.
Back in the early 90s when we were restoring the homestead, we found that the floorboards were crow's ash, beautiful crow's ash that would have been grown in this region, and red cedar, of course, and white beech, pale beech, and that's all on the front of the homestead. And apparently they build boats out of beech, so that's the reason why it lasts as long as it has. It holds a very special place in my heart. We're just passing on the baton.